In this year that's like no other, our next speaker has identified the key ingredient for successfully navigating the new normal. It's all about connection. In this session, our speaker shares a highly personal and emotional account of the impact that the loss of human connection can have on our mental health. So lean in and listen. This is a session that will touch your heart and remind you of your own power and also responsibility to connect with others. I invite you to enjoy the warmth and wisdom of internationally recognised human connection expert, Simone Heng.
Imagine it's 2025, 5 years from our global pandemic that changed the way that we live. You only have to go into work 4 days a week, only really if there's a face-to-face meeting. When you do go into work, however, your starting and ending times have been staggered so that you're never having that huge busy commute where you bump into lots of people and you're potentially making contact. Your company used to be part of a huge tower block of different offices where you'd often bump into people in the elevator or in the hallways, the communal areas from different workplaces. Now your office, your company has built a custom-built building of its own with just your existing colleagues. As you get into work and you take the touchless elevator up to your floor and you step out, you notice that the corridor is 60% bigger than the work corridors before COVID-19, so that no one can accidentally touch each other. And you walk into your workplace, which used to be an open planned office. You can still see everyone, but now you're divided by these tall perspex screens that are bolted into the floor. You put a couple of plants in there to make it feel less like a hospital. That afternoon, you have your face-to-face meeting. And the reason you make an effort to do that is because you've realized that employee retention and your team's actioning of things from those meetings are better when they're face-to-face. But you still sit in that meeting socially distanced or physically distanced, a meter apart from your colleagues. When the meeting's over, you realize that there's actually nothing left to do at work that you couldn't do at home. So you jump on the subway, the train, the MRT, and you travel back to your house where your husband and you or your wife and you have moved outside of the main city. And on that commute, there are a few people, but it's a lot less than before COVID-19 because of those staggered working times. You finally sit down at your home desk and you relish the silence. You're about to have a virtual meeting, and it's amazing that since you soundproofed your house, you can't hear the dogs from the neighbors barking next door, the kids giggling when they run home from school, or the steps of the postman to put anything into your postbox. Effectively, you can no longer hear your tribe. This is a real prediction from experts that I actually read. And as a human connection specialist, I got really alarmed. This is what they think our life is going to look like in the next 24 months to 5 years. You see, we are tribal animals, human beings. We were born early man, living in a tribe, and the tribe kept us safe. That need to belong and be connected is wired into our brain. And they did a brain scan of the human brain when we are connecting, and a brain scan of our brain at default. And guess what? They look really, really similar. Connection is what we are meant to do. It is why we are on this planet. In that tribe, safety was really important. So if we were pregnant and slowing everyone down, the other women would gather for our children and our family. If we were out hunting and we were injured, the other men would bring home game and feed our families. And if we were unlucky enough to be cast out of the tribe, not belonging, there was no one to look over us and make sure that we were safe in the night from predators like your saber-toothed tigers. And this is why in a future where we will be more disconnected than we already were prior to the pandemic, there are serious social, mental, and physical repercussions. Like I mentioned to you, we are wired for connection. So when our brain is cast out of the tribe, when we are lonely or we perceive we are alone, so we could still be surrounded by people, our brain floods us with that fight or flight response that we would have had being thrown out of the tribe. So cortisol, norepinephrine, adrenaline, things that can actually lead to many life-shortening diseases. And so there are many studies, and I won't go into them, but many studies proving that those people who have strong social connections live longer. Human connection is fantastic for your health. So what do we do in a future where there's going to be less human connection than ever? And why is this important to you, this audience? Well, firstly, some of the implications include anxiety and depression, like I mentioned, lower immunity. Really ironic that the social distancing from this pandemic is actually lowering our immunity when immunity is what we need, and social awkwardness. And these things are really, really important to you and the job that you do, because anybody who's building systems created to connect humans cannot do that job well if they're disconnected themselves. So social awkwardness, one of the implications of this future that I wanted to discuss, has already been cited in a recent New York Times article that went viral. And it's saying that the pandemic is making everyone socially awkward. And some of the symptoms it cited were oversharing on Zoom, having outbursts at people because we've forgotten how to read those social codes. So thinking that we're being insulted or slighted when we're not. And one of the others was, most importantly, and something that I've gone through, was yearning to be connected with people, but once in their presence, immediately wanting to revert. And so I thought that this was really reminiscent of the time in my life that I have been the most disconnected. It was 2013, and I was living La Vida Loca in Dubai, working for a radio station that I loved. And one day my phone rang, and my sister said, "Simone, I think you should come home." My mother had suffered a massive stroke. And upon entering the hospital that day and seeing her, I knew that my 10 years of life as an expat were over and I had to come back. So I quit my job and moved home to take care of my mum and help with all of the things that go along with when a family member becomes paralyzed. Every day from the morning for about 5 hours, I would go to the nursing home, the only young person in there, and I would sit with my mum, feeling completely useless. Until one day I said to the carers, "Would you mind if I helped you take mum to the bathroom? It's the least I could do for this woman that I loved so much." And I knocked on the door and they told me to come in, and they were taking her to the toilet, and she was holding on to like a railing where you hang towels, facing the white tiles, her back facing me. And how it usually works is one carer would stabilize her weak side. And as my mum's paralyzed right down the center, she rocks like a bird with a broken wing back and forth. The carer catches her underneath. It's then her job to help my mother out of her nappy, and the other carer pushes the commode in. The simple task, all they asked of me was that I would push the wheelchair back so they could get the commode in. And as I'm pulling the wheelchair back, I just was not at all prepared for what I saw. And my face of horror was seen by my mum in the mirror. "Hello, darling," she said. And she caught my face, maybe because I've been in media so long, I quickly put on a smiley face, not wanting to help her to lose her dignity any more quickly than she already was. And I left into her bedroom and I sobbed. But how did my mother's disconnection lead to my own? Well, you see, as a second punch in the face that comes with when a family member that you love dearly becomes paralyzed or has dementia or has to go into a facility, is you, the children, have to help clean up what's left behind. My mother and father, my late dad, had 70 years worth of stuff in our family home. And my sister and I wanted to clear that up and rent it out to give my mum more of an income for rehabilitation and physiotherapy. And because I had been the prodigal daughter enjoying my expat life for 10 years, I knew, because it's part of being in an Asian family, that it was my responsibility. So I quit my job that I'd gotten on the radio there in Australia, and I started cleaning from 9 in the morning to 5 in the evening for 6 months. My mum is a hoarder. And before we have any judgment about that, like the thing we see in the TV shows, what I want to tell you very clearly is that hoarding is an external manifestation of a deep internal pain. It's like screaming for help, just with things. And when they say empty nest, my mum literally had filled the empty nest, which was our childhood home, with stuff. Over 5 months, I went from room to room to room. I saw that she couldn't even sleep anymore, so she had moved from one room to another until I finally reached ground zero, the place where this all began. My parents' master bedroom, where her and my father had slept side by side for 25 years. And when I pushed open the door to that room, it could barely open, and I could see it. I'm very small. I could see above my head. There were things above my head height on the other side of that door waiting to crash on top of me. As I got in, I saw craft magazine after quilting magazine after craft magazine that my mother had kept. Clothes after clothes after clothes. You know, these piles of clothes were not junk, I realized. These were sculptures of her pain and her grief. But the saddest thing of all that I saw, and this always moves me, is that she kept all of these plastic takeaway containers. And for those of you who are Asian, who have Asian relatives, you might laugh on this because that's something that a lot of aunties do. But my mum had never cooked a meal, barely cooked a meal for us our whole childhood. So I realized that she had kept these containers for parties she hoped she would one day have. The kind of parties we had before my dad died, where he would cook and I would go door to door in our neighborhood giving Hokkien mee in takeaway containers to our neighbors. Maybe she was hoping to save them for parties one day with her grandchildren. It was incredibly, incredibly sad. So I worked my way down through these piles of things until I hit carpet height of the floor. And there were 3 things: my dad's x-rays from before he died, a bag full of every newspaper clipping she had ever gotten of his obituary, and a 3rd bag full of every card she ever got from anyone consoling her on the death of my father. And I remember sitting back sitting down that day and just putting down my rag and my cleaning spray and realizing that that was when it all started. From the day that he died, April 6th, 2004, my mother stopped throwing anything away. And it just grew and grew and grew. And now there was a place in that room that I was avoiding, and that was the bathtub. And it got to the day where I couldn't avoid it anymore. It was the last thing to be cleaned. And it had been clogged for a long time, and it was kind of still water, dark, with receipts on the top of it. And I knew that it had to be me. Taking care of your parents' things is the last thing that any of us, it's the last gift we will ever give our parents. Because you find things in your parents' house that you know a third party can't take care of. Things like a friend of mine, she found presents her father had wrapped for his mistress. Another person found letters her mother had written to the Vatican begging for a divorce. These are things that you wouldn't want people outside the family to ever see. And knowing this, I took a deep breath and I pulled the rubber glove onto my hand and I heard it snap. And I plunged my hand into the bath to pull the plug out and begin the process. And that is the moment when I knew I had lost connection with myself. And remember, we do not connect well with other people if we don't have a connection with ourselves. My identity was lost. 6 months before, I had been doing radio like I'd always been doing. And 6 months later, I was a full-time cleaner. And of course, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that as an occupation. It's just, I wasn't very good at it. I wasn't trained at it. It isn't where I thought life would go. And in that losing of my identity and of myself, the unraveling began, because I also would go and overshare at the shops when I buy a loaf of bread and tell the shopkeeper my entire story, just like what we're now seeing on Zoom where people are oversharing because they're craving connection. I would have outbursts at my relatives who didn't know the depth of what was happening in that house and just thought I was cleaning. But I think the biggest thing that led to my disconnection was my fight or flight, the perception that I was alone. I thought there was not another 30-year-old in the world who had a father in the grave and a mother in the wheelchair. And I think I now realize all of these years later how wrong that was, but I isolated myself. And if it can happen to me, someone who's actually quite socially adept, who works in the field of human connection, it can happen to any one of us. And in this pandemic, people who are already at risk are pushed closer to the edge than ever before. People who perceived they were alone before are further now into anxiety and depression. And in April this year, I lost my mentor in Dubai to suicide in quarantine in Melbourne when he repatriated from Dubai back to Australia. It can happen to anybody that we love. So please look at the people around you and how you can be of service to them. And that now brings me to the solutions. How can we, in a future where there will be even less connection there is now, be able to bring those feel-good hormones that we get from connecting? Our brain is a reward system to elicit dopamine. We get oxytocin by touch. So what are we going to do? Well, firstly, in a future where your life will literally be, if the experts are right, socializing amongst the people in your family and then in your workplace and back and forward, and very little new connections, our efforts to reach out have to be bigger than ever. So I am the embarrassing person for my partner that when we go out, even though in Singapore we have to wear masks, I am giving what they call the Duchenne smile, which is smiling from the eyes through the mask. I say hello to every uncle and auntie. I am giving them that reward system of dopamine. They're giving it back to me. We're connecting for our well-being. And I'm putting myself out there. Even though sometimes I'm a bit embarrassing, it's really, really important so that we can hear our tribe again. Secondly, we have to deepen our existing human connections. So if you have connections already in your network, let's try and be more vulnerable. Disclosing to people who deserve to hear your information is really important. It also stops us from oversharing when buying a loaf of bread or on Zoom. So try and ask deeper questions of your connections. Try and have more rapport, go deeper. And that will help bring more of that life-giving connection into your daily routine. The last thing that's really important is that for those of you who anything that I've said on this session has triggered something, resonate with you, or you know someone in your life at risk, please encourage them to get professional help. The fast version of the conclusion of that story I told you was that I was lucky enough to go and speak to someone and was able to resolve and process all of that trauma from that time, getting me further away from the ledge. So please, if there are people in your life that need you, that you know are waiting for someone to show them that they're acknowledged, that they're part of the tribe, that they're not cast out in the night, reach out to them and let them know. It's really, really important. And that's my final note today. Please, you all know someone in your community. I want you to make a note right now that you're going to do a video call or just a message, some form of connection during this time. I'm Simone Heng. Thank you so much.